The recording now starts. In your attempt to gather your data for qualitative researches, like the ones that you're going to do this semester, observations and interviews can come to be very useful methods. How does an observation work? For us to answer this question, we of course have to begin by knowing the types of observations. So the definition of an observation is there, but beyond observation, we have to know what the types are. Because by knowing the types of observations and methods, we would know what kind of observation we can do. So we have a participant observation and a non-participant observation. For participant observations, the researcher interacts with the people being observed. The researcher becomes a part of the dealings of the participants of that particular research. The researcher talks, converses, behaves together with the participants of the research. And from there, observations will have to be also known or determined. A non-participant observation is really the opposite, where the researcher merely functions as an observer. It is from an observer's point of view. So the researcher does not interact, but simply waits for observation for behaviors to come out. So the behavior the researcher may just choose to stay at a particular corner while the observation goes on. The observer even brings with him a checklist, and that checklist contains the behaviors that are expected to be observed from that particular group. There are also two methods in doing observation. It could be direct or indirect. Direct observation is observing the behavior as it really occurs, like when it comes out, or doing the observation until such particular behavior comes out, as until it is shown by the participant. While indirect observation requires knowledge of where that participant or the participants belong, because it has something to do with recalling evidences of occurrences. It has something to do with the researcher using evidence of behaviors. So it may not necessarily rely on what's explicitly shown, but the researcher will have to look at perhaps the effects of that behavior. Assuming that the researcher is observing juvenile delinquents in the community, assuming that that's the topic, student juvenile delinquents. Under direct observation, the researcher will have to really look for a juvenile delinquent and will follow the juvenile delinquent wherever he goes or she goes. And the observation goes on. The monitoring of what the juvenile delinquent does goes on. That's direct observation. Indirect observation works this way. Let's assume that the researcher is Josh and the juvenile delinquent is Rance. So as the researcher, what Josh will do is to simply look at the environment where Rance belongs. Rance will not be observed by Josh, but Josh will look at how the people in the community think towards Rance. Josh will look at the house where Rance lives, or observe the house where Rance lives. If the things in the house are quite arranged, then Josh will take note of them, hoping that the arrangement in the house speaks of Rance. Or if Josh finds out that people avoid Rance, so Josh's observation will be noted in terms of how the community has behaved in the presence of Rance. That's indirect, to speak of what that juvenile delinquent does or how that juvenile delinquent behaves. Other methods you have here methods of indirect observation. You have continuous monitoring, the way people deal with one another. So this is more of a large scale kind of indirect observation. You can also do spot sampling. Spot sampling can be in two ways. You can have time allocation or experience sampling. Time allocation goes into the record of what best activities people observe in an undetermined place and time. Experience sampling lets you record people's response any time of the day to question their present activities, time of the day or week to question their present activities, companions, feelings, and others. What are the advantages of doing an observation? First, data is simple. Recording is simple. Data collection is simple. Data recording is really simple. It is inclined to realizing its objective because it just depends on watching and listening to the subjects without necessarily experiencing worries whether or not people will say no or yes to your observation. I mean, it does while you are watching your participants, it's not necessary that they will have to say no, 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 or okay. But of course, it will have to reach a point where when you do observation, the research you're doing will really have to be approved, and that you are going to also exercise ethics for whatever data you are going to obtain. It offers observations, also offer fresh and first-hand knowledge that will help you come out with an easy understanding and depth and deep reflection of data. There's a particular depth in the data that you'll obtain because you yourself have observed how things happen around the participant and with that participant. In terms of disadvantages, it requires a long time for planning. It's such a big gamble for a researcher to continue or to do an observation without a good plan. Engrossed in participating in the subject activities, you may eclipse or neglect the primary source of the research, role of the research. It is prone to your hearing derogatory statements from some people in the group that will lead to your biased stand toward other group members. Of course, as there is no control of what you could observe, what could come out from the behaviors of your participants, expect for anything derogatory or dehumanizing to be observed. One other danger with doing an observation is if the participants know that they've been observed, what could possibly happen? Like, for instance, assuming that I'm the researcher and you yourselves are aware that I'm observing you, you are my participants. What could a participant possibly do, Sean?
Probably, sir, people, the participant would, what do you call this, change his actions, his or her actions, if
Correct.
she knows he is observed.
Correct. That's a very big possibility. And that's one big disadvantage with observations. The moment the participant becomes aware that there is an observer, as to how Sean said it, the participant might change his actions or behaviors to something that is not really reflective of who the participant is. So this is now leading to invalid observations or invalid data, unreliable data because the participant faked the behavior. The behavior is not the authentic one anymore because perhaps the participant did that in order not to have not in order for the community where the participant belongs not to be thought of wrongly or differently by the researcher, or probably the participant did that plainly to impress the researcher. So these are the dangers in doing an observation. In lieu of the observation, you can do an interview. An interview may come as unstructured, semi-structured, or structured. A structured interview prepares a formal list of array of questions. So there's like already a set or a series of specific questions that you wish to be addressed. Yes, it's all right, Vince. There are already questions that you've planned out, and these are the only ones that you want to be answered. That's why it's structured. The semi-structured questionnaire, interview prepares questions but comes out to be open for other ideas from the participant. So there's already like a set of questions, but at the same time, it provides supplementary questions that could be asked appropriately or if needed. Perhaps the purpose of which is to continue probing the participant to give the answer that is more authentic, or perhaps the researcher gave that question or these supplementary questions in order to drive the participant to the desired path of the research. More or less, your interviews will be like this: semi-structured. Why are they semi-structured? Have you already crafted your research questions? You do. And when you do your interviews, like what I told you before, prepare to have some follow-ups, probing questions. Who knows when you what's your study again, sure?
About academic. Yeah.
Music motivation from music. What if the participants in your interview, the participants answer already deviated from the line of thought coming from your list of prepared questions? Be ready to have some follow-ups or probing in a manner to bring the participant back to the line of questions relative to the study that you are doing, making your studies semi-structured. Will all of you do an interview? Will everybody do an interview? Sure, Christopher, will you do an interview?
Yes, sir.
Sean Edson, interview.
Yes, sir.
James, Jana, Lucia, interview.
We might.
Wait, we might. What is that, James? What do you mean by we might? There's a loose plan already of what you are going to do now. Look at your classmates. Listen to the two pairs that I mentioned earlier. They now know what to do. That okay, sir. We'll really do an interview, sir.
We do
Rance,
an
Josh, what will you do? Interview.
Interview and part
Oh,
observation of their
interview.
interactions toward other people.
see, they already have a plan already. Vince and Rodney, interview. Queenie
Yes,
Allen, interview.
yes, sir. Interview.
Oh, Vince and Rodney, interview. Queenie Allen, interview. What was that, James? Might. There's some level of
Most likely.
danger.
Like I can't decide for the two with the
Most
two.
likely, that's why it's might.
Yeah.
Wait,
But we will.
Jana, Lucia, and James, you should now arrive at what you really want to do, huh?
Yes, sir. We'll just ask someone who is a victim of the said problem. Then we will ask
Okay.
their
Josh,
experience.
what is it again that you plan to do? Interview and observation?
Yes, sir.
How will you do the observation, Josh?
Um, the selected
Wait,
target
what is the
audience
topic
are
again?
sibling relations, sir, in general.
Sibling relations. What in sibling relations?
Like we plan to interview them with how they think. Like the interviewing part is inside the family and their interaction towards their siblings.
Oh, okay, okay.
Then the second part of our study, which is the observation, is to observe how their everyday interactions with their sibling affect the way they behave towards other people and
How
society.
will you do that observation, Josh?
If possible, we can make use of um,
Because you're talking about
asking their friends,
everyday.
or if not, like we can make use of like playing a game with them, because in that way we'll be like able to observe how they really behave.
Is that the gauge of sibling relations?
Oh, that's we have two parts, one, sir. Like sibling relations itself, and then the effects of sibling relations, like how it affects the individual and their behavior outside of the siblings range.
But what is the sibling? I thought you were just talking about siblings relations. Why will you talk about anything outside of siblings range?
Ano, like how their sibling relations affect who they really are, sir, ba, towards society.
Okay. Sibling relationship affecting how they behave to in the community.
Yes, sir.
Wow, that's qualitative researches are broad, but that's too broad. I heard from you earlier, Josh, that there is a second part. Diba? You made mention of a second part.
Yes, sir.
Is it practical to do two parts in your research?
Uh, we'll make it, we'll combine it into one so that it will be, um we plan to make it in a subtle way that nobody would notice. We'll try our best to make it subtle.
Hmm. You try your best to make it subtle, but I'm worried that your choice of a method might be incorrect now.
But if it really won't work, sir, then we'll just go with the interview one.
Because it's like this, Josh, na doing an observation as of this time is really impractical and illogical. I mean,
How, sir?
how can you do an observation when you are not physically around your participants?
Spies, like
No, you cannot act as spies. You cannot hire people.
no,
The
like
observers are the researchers themselves.
we can try to like gain like connections with like your siblings.
But Josh, if their siblings act as the okay, I think what you plan here is to tap their siblings.
Yes, but we'll not
That's
tap into.
not the researchers' observations anymore.
Oh, yeah.
That's not an observation anymore. Who is involved in doing everybody? When you do an observation, who will do it? The researcher or someone else for the researcher?
Researcher.
The
Us.
researcher will have to do it him or herself because the researcher is the one who should verify that these are the behaviors to be to be noted. It's like this, Josh. Even if you hire someone, it's actually fine to hire someone or to ask someone to do it for you. But mind you, that other person is not on a researcher's foot.
As I just tried to confirm it. Kay, I had a feeling that it would not be rational.
It really is not. The interview will do fine, Josh. The interview
Yeah.
will do fine.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'll keep that
And
in mind, sir.
actually, Josh, what you'll end up with later on is also an interview. Why? Di ba, as you said, you'll ask the siblings.
Yes.
O, di ba, is that not an interview?
Still an interview.
You'll ask them, like, assuming that the siblings are, assuming that you want to spy on, let's use your term, assuming that you want to spy on Vince. But since you can't do it, you are not physically around, you'll request Sean Bulutano to spy on Vince, assuming that Sean and Vince are siblings. Josh, no, that's what you plan to do.
Yes, something like
Oh,
that.
okay. So now, for you to know how Vince behaves, you'll ask Sean. Diba?
Yes, it's still an
Like,
interview.
Sean, how did Vince do it how did Vince react when you took his bread? Bread. Why was I even thinking of bread? When you took his share of the bread. So what are you doing there, Josh? Is that an observation and an interview?
It is clearly still an interview.
It is still an interview. The observation really works this way, Josh. Oh, assuming that I'm the one doing the research of Josh, ha. This Zoom session, oh no, wherever you are, you will be bringing a camera with you, or that there should be a camera in all angles of your house so that I would see. So this is what I'll do. Okay, this is what Sher is doing right now. Okay, Sher is not doing this at this moment. See, I am looking at how things are going on because that's what an observation is.
So,
That's why earlier, Josh, I said it's illogical and impractical as of this time to do an observation. Unless, of course, unless, ha, sir, what if, assuming Josh, that you'll observe Sean, Sean Bulutano, you observe Sean. Sir, what if the parents of Sean would allow me to stay in their house for 2 weeks?
That's too much.
If the parents of the family of Sean allows it, then you be there, you stay in their place, you do the observation there. And you know what the effect is? If Sean, do you think your family would allow that?
Probably only 2 days, sir. But
Oh,
two
see,
weeks.
Josh,
But 2 weeks is too much, no, sir.
okay, okay, 1 week, 1 week, 1 week, 1 week.
1 week.
Oh, Josh, I'm trying to make negotiations for you, Josh.
Never mind, I say I just
But
thought of
Sean
it.
Bulutano is an only child. Are you not?
No, sir. I have a sibling, sir.
Siblings, Josh. Oh. But of course, Sean, don't force it out to your parents, huh? It was just, it was a silly idea, I know. But
It's okay, sir.
assuming that Josh proceeds with that, who knows? No, of course, there's a possibility that later on Josh will send a message to Sean. Sean, perhaps you would like to ask the permission from your parents because you already said it that 1 week will probably do. The danger here, Josh, is when you go to the house of Sean to observe him for the entire week, Sean's behavior will surely change, right, Sean?
Yes.
Sean's behavior will surely, he said it himself earlier. That's one
Especially the fact
danger
that he
with an
doesn't know me.
observation. He will surely change because, for one thing, Sean will feel so conscious that someone's looking at him. You'll find that Sean will now sleep properly on his bed. He will not do anything that's not going to give yeah, Sean will do his best to avoid doing something that will give a wrong impression of him. So let's assume that Sean at home is the one who throws a pillow or a chair at his older sister, Sean, or older brother?
Younger sister, sir.
Younger sister. Let's assume that Sean is the older brother who throws a chair at his younger sister. Because of your presence, Josh, Sean will now pack himself differently. So Sean will instead do things like, "Uy, younger sister, you sit here, you sit beside me." And the younger sister will be surprised herself. I think there's something wrong with Kuya today. I think there's something wrong with Kuya this week. But there will be changes in behaviors the moment you come to observe the person. Of
I have one
course,
last question then.
for a while, Rance also has siblings. And Rance is your pair, Josh. I think you know where I'm driving here, where I'm driving at.
Yes.
Rance, you cannot make yourself the participant. Nor will any of the household will any of the members of the household where you belong. Therefore, you researchers and your immediate family members must not be used as participants because we want to avoid we want to reduce as much bias as we can. Yes, Josh?
I have one last question, sir.
What is it?
Regarding the behavioral change that we just mentioned just now, sir, is it also a subject to be a qualitative researcher?
It can be, but you can't determine the causes of these. You can't really determine the causes and if a behavioral change really has happened. Because you are not there, man, Josh, before the change took place. Before the change happened, you were not aware of what behaviors. Let's go back to the case of Sean. You were not aware of how Sean treated his younger sibling, his younger sister before your study. So you can't really gauge the change or the amount of change manifested in the behavior. And to ask for it through a questionnaire, through an interview from the people at home is, I think, not justifiable enough because their observations might not stand to suffice to speak of what really the behavior is of the person before your study came. So there again, allow me to also express my concern. I think for this time, Josh, it's practical not to use an observation.
Thank you, sir. I'll keep that in mind, sir.
Thank you. We proceed with the interview. The interview is of course another option. Allen, how do you intend to do the interview?
We still haven't planned pa, sir, pero I send na ako.
What's your topic again, Allen? Food disorders?
Single parenthood, sir.
Ah, single parenthood. Ay, okay. I thought it's Queenie's problem.
Yes, sir.
It's Queenie's problem. It's the problem that Queenie wanted to place in her research, and then the both of you are doing it. Okay.
Yes,
That
sir.
kind of study really works with an interview. I mean, but be sure when you do your interviews, people, first and foremost, get the permission of the interviewee. You must not ambush your interviewee. Be sure that when you do the interview, it is with permission from the person being interviewed. If the person, like your study, Alan, discusses a controversial topic, diba? It's single parenthood, and some might find it to be a sensitive issue to talk about. So, it is better to really get the consent of the participant. If the participant wishes, yes, Josh, if the participant wishes to say no, then you can't force the participant. Approaches to interviews. You can do an individual interview or a group interview. Of course, it's perhaps doing any of these interviews bears a consequence and also a drawback. There's like an advantage and there's also a drawback. When you do individual interviews, you are more or less taking the opportunity to know more that person you are interviewing. And with only you around, with not so many people listening to the story in that interview, the interviewee might not feel that conscious or as conscious or anxious compared to when a group is being interviewed altogether. But one drawback of this method is that it is really time consuming. Imagine if you'll interview 10 people, and that's probably going to take a lot of time. That's why group interviews come out as an option, where altogether you raise the question and the interview portion comes out. Answers will be retrieved from the ones who are part of the group. But the truth is, there are others who don't find this to be also a good option because they might not feel comfortable to share to the group an answer which could be a sensitive answer, or that others feel like not sharing when they're in a bigger group. They would prefer to share their sentiments, their feelings when they're just by themselves or with one person only. You have a mediated interview. The mediated interview is done with no face-to-face format, meaning you'll have to use communication devices like the telephones, mobile phones, emails, and so on. What interview do you intend to do? Like a personal interview, you'll really talk with the person, or you'll send the question in some particular devices and that the person will just respond. Sher and Christopher, what do you intend to do? Like a personal interview, one-on-one interview?
As for me, sir, I think I'll just send or do a video call. I don't know this.
Sean, in your case, Sean,
Probably, sir, I would have permission from the participant, sir, whether he or she chooses to just call or have a video call on Messenger.
okay. By the way, whatever your choice of method is or whatever happens, please take note of that, ha? Like for instance, if you look at the chapter 1 that if you look at the research paper that I sent you weeks ago, there's an area there for research methodology. For the research instrument, you'll have to declare that you are doing an interview. But the interview that you'll do comes in varying types. As one participant preferred perhaps that it be a personal interview, the other one preferred that it be a mediated interview. Again, for as long as you are going to be really clear in your write-up on the nature of the instrument that you are doing. Conducting an interview. First, you get to know each other. Then having an idea of the research. You tell the respondents of the nature of your interview. Like, what is that interview for? What is it meant to accomplish? From there, you start the interview. And then starting the interview includes self-introduction questions, and then determining attitudes, subjects' thoughts. That's part of the interview already. And then proceed now to step 4, where you conduct the interview proper. This interview proper portion is where you point out the questions that you have prepared for or that you have already lined up. Then you put an end to the interview. It's important that you also assure the interviewee that you are not going to leak out any of the information that you obtain. Though this is for research purposes, I think interviewees will understand, especially if you assure them of their identity's confidentiality. What's going to happen, Rabbi, is their responses will come out in narrative form. Their responses will appear as your data. But at least you should assure them that their identities will be kept in confidentiality. They will be held confidential. That's the assurance that we need to give our participants, all the more with topics that are really controversial and sensitive. Lastly, you ponder over the interview or you do your afterthoughts. By the way, do not also forget to thank your interviewee. Thanking the interviewee might mean giving some doing a handshake, like thank you so much, congratulations. You say thank you so much, thank you for your time. The handshake more or less gives the assurance that you can trust me that whatever it is that you shared now will be held confidential. Even other interviews would end with the giving of tokens. Some do that. They'll give some form of incentives or rewards to those who granted them the chance of an interview. I'm not, of course, saying that you should really give a reward or an incentive, like a monetary reward or a monetary incentive. For instance, Sean, the topic again is procrastination, no?
Sir.
I'm
Yes.
not, the pair of Sean and Edson need not necessarily prepare an envelope that contains a particular amount of money to be given to every participant. No, you don't have to do something like that. But if you want to, why not? It's up to you. But I am not demanding that you do that. Let's face it, there might be, let's just be ready, huh? There just might be a participant who'll ask, what's in it for me? What's in this for me? What will I get from this? Be ready with that. That's a possibility. Assuming you'll ask me, sir, can we make you a participant in our research? What will I get from it? How much will you pay me? What will I, how much will I get? No, sorry. What do I have to earn from this? You'll be like, you'll have bragging rights for helping us finish our research paper. What will bragging rights do me? Will it feed me my meals on the table? No, I need money. Of course, that's the worst case. Probably you will not encounter something like that because you're still students doing research, but just be ready in case someone asks, what's in it for me? The moment you hear a question that's like that, that's leaning to a participant saying no or being hesitant in participating in your research. Then for step 6, in the conduct of an interview, you ponder over the interview. You give your afterthoughts. There's also another method, and that's with the use of a questionnaire. So a questionnaire is also a common research instrument. This is prepared with a lot of items, and there are kinds of manners by which this can be distributed. You can self-administer the questionnaire. You can do a postal questionnaire, meaning you're going to send the questionnaire online or through mail, like mail, not email. So you can do that, but of course you can also choose the the self-administered questionnaire. It's always better to do a self-administration of the questionnaire, so that if questions arise from the end of the participant, if there are items that they wish to be clarified or cleared out, if there are items in the questionnaire that confuse them, the researcher is right away available to clarify things out. The researcher will right away be there to address these concerns. If the concerns are not being addressed, there's a possibility that the questionnaire will not be answered in the essence expected from each item. Advantages and disadvantages for questionnaires are also there, just like observations and interviews. There's a possibility, just be ready, there's a possibility that when you do a questionnaire, when you prepare a questionnaire, the responses given to it are not authentic. They're not also authentic. Someone might just answer the questionnaire plainly for the purpose of completing its contents. Someone might just finish the questionnaire because there's nothing else left to do, and so, oh no, someone might just finish the questionnaire with so many things, so many other things to do, so there's a pressure on time, so the questionnaire is unanswered in a rushed manner, so the integrity of the questionnaire is also lost. There's also a possibility where your questionnaire will be answered in all honesty and sincerity. That's of course if you have a very good participant. FGDs, focused group discussions. FGDs come out as a particular method in collecting data where a facilitator, a researcher may act as a facilitator, or a facilitator will have to be asked to be in their midst. So what happens in an FGD is answers to specific questions are collected, and then these answers come out from the discussion to a particular topic. So the facilitator is the one manning the discussion, and the researcher is there simply to note responses to the discussion initiated by the facilitator. But I think in your case, you are not to do an FGD. An FGD is quite close to a group interview. But in a group interview, it's the researcher really throwing in the question to the entire group. In an FGD, a facilitator comes out. There's a guidance of a moderator or facilitator. There's a moderator or facilitator talk, and the members respond. And the members, by the way, are purposely chosen to be part of that FGD. And they respond to the discussion provided by the facilitator, and this discussion is where the researcher takes out the necessary responses or behaviors needed for that qualitative research. Fortunately, I don't know if you see it as something fortunate. Fortunately, in the circumstance now, all that you'll do is an interview. But let's not totally discount Josh had the possibility of staying in the place of Sean Ulutano. Let's not totally discount that. I think Sean just asked for permission. Who else has siblings here in you? No, then yeah, Josh and Rance are the only ones who should not make use of themselves. Edson has a sibling. James has a sibling. Allen has a sibling. Perhaps one of them would offer their house to you for like a week or two.
Sir, it was just a confirmation, sir.
Just a confirmation, but later on you'd wish that that's what you did. No, perhaps
I'd rather not.
at the end of the semester, you'd be telling me, I wish I did what you told me, sir, to stay in the house of one of my classmates and observe him for 1 week. Anyway, we'll see what you can come up with. especially that the paper is still in its continuity of being constructed. For now, that will be all. Goodbye and thank you, grade 11.
Goodbye, sir.
Do not forget what you're supposed to submit on Friday.